I didn't expect the evening to matter. It was one of those quiet, ordinary days where you don't look for anything beyond a cup of coffee and a bit of silence. I slipped into the small cafe on the corner, a place that always smelled faintly of roasted beans and old books. The windows fogged gently from the rain outside, and for a moment, the world felt slower than usual. That's when I saw her. She was seated alone by the window, her chin resting lightly against her hand, a book open in front of her that she didn't seem to be reading. There was a calmness in the way she sat, a kind of grace you don't see often. Her hair fell loosely around her shoulders, dark with threads of silver that caught the light in a way that made me pause longer than I should have. I'd seen her before, passing by in the neighborhood at a community event once or twice, but never like this. Never where I had the space to notice the small things, the delicate arch of her brows, the faint tiredness beneath her eyes, the way she stirred her coffee absent-mindedly as if her thoughts were far away. I ordered my drink and, by some chance of timing, the only empty table left was the one near hers. When I sat down, she glanced up, offering a polite smile. It wasn't forced, just the kind of smile people give when they've been caught lost in their own world. We exchanged a few casual words at first, something about the weather, about the relentless rain that had been falling all week. Her voice struck me immediately, low, steady, carrying the kind of softness that draws you in without trying. It didn't take long before the conversation deepened, almost without effort. She asked what I was reading, and I admitted I hadn't touched my book in weeks. She laughed, a warm, unguarded sound that surprised me with how much I wanted to hear it again. And then she said something that lingered. You have this way of saying things, it makes people listen. You always know what to say. She said it almost absent-mindedly, like she hadn't meant to reveal that thought out loud. But I caught it, and though I didn't respond directly in that moment, inside, I felt a tug of something rare, like a thread being pulled between us. Her presence filled the space differently than anyone else's had. Every small gesture, the way she brushed her hair behind her ear, the way her eyes softened when she looked at me, felt alive with meaning I couldn't name yet. I didn't realize then how important that rainy evening would become. All I knew was that something in me had shifted, and it was because of her. The days that followed carried her presence in small, unexpected ways. I would walk into that cafe and half expect to see her by the window, book in hand, coffee cooling untouched. Sometimes she was there, sometimes not. But the thought of her was enough to make the air feel different, charged with a quiet anticipation. When she was there, conversation came easily, though I couldn't explain why. With most people, I stumble, second-guess, search for the right words. With her, I didn't have to think. My sentences formed themselves as if they already belonged to her ears. One afternoon, we ended up talking about music. She confessed she hadn't kept up with new artists, that she found comfort in the same records she loved in her 20s. I told her I'd do the same when I reached her age, but the moment the words slipped out, I hesitated, worried I'd crossed a line. But she only smiled, faintly amused. When you reach my age, she repeated, shaking her head. You make it sound like I'm ancient. There was no sting in her voice, only a softness I couldn't miss. She teased, but beneath it, I sensed something unspoken, a vulnerability she tried to cover with humor. I leaned forward just slightly, enough that my words felt close. I didn't mean it that way. I just meant, you've lived with more stories than I have. I think that's something worth carrying, not hiding. Her eyes held mine for a long moment. Then came the line that would echo in me long after she said it. You always know what to say. She said it quietly, almost like a secret she hadn't planned to share. I smiled, though something inside me tightened. The truth was, I didn't always know. Most of the time, I barely understood myself. But when it came to her, words felt effortless, like they were waiting in me, shaped only for her. So I answered simply, steady and honest. Only when it's you. The words seemed to hang in the air longer than they should have. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Her hand, resting on the table, shifted ever so slightly toward mine, not quite touching but close enough that I felt the warmth radiating from her skin. Her breath caught, just barely, before she laughed it off and reached for her cup. But I saw the flicker in her eyes, the kind of flicker that only comes when something lands deeper than expected. From that moment, our conversations carried a new weight. Even when we spoke about simple things, the rain, the books we hadn't finished, the quiet loneliness of city nights, there was something else beneath it all. An undercurrent, a pull. And though I couldn't name it then, I knew this much. With her, silence was never empty. It was charged, alive, filled with everything we hadn't yet said. It was a quiet evening when she invited me to walk with her through the park near her apartment. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold, and a gentle breeze carried the faint scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. She walked beside me, her pace unhurried, as if she had all the time in the world. But I knew better. She was always cautious about how much she let others in. We talked about trivial things at first, the kind of casual chatter that masks the deeper truths. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the conversation shifted. She paused mid-step and confessed, quietly, as though she were admitting a secret she had barely allowed herself to acknowledge. Sometimes, I wonder if people still see me, the real me, or if they only see what they expect someone my age to be. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I noticed her hands, slightly trembling, brushing against the straps of her bag. Her eyes were downcast, staring at the path ahead, yet I could sense the weight she carried in every small movement. "I guess I'm afraid of being overlooked," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I reached out, placing my hand lightly over hers. The contact was fleeting but intentional, and I felt her tense slightly before relaxing. "You're not invisible," I said softly, "and I don't just see the surface. I notice everything about you. The quiet strength, the way you make people feel at ease, the little things you think no one sees." Her shoulders shifted as if she were trying to hold herself taller, trying not to show the sudden vulnerability that flickered across her face. But in that moment, there was no hiding from each other. My gaze softened, and she finally looked up at me, eyes glistening with something that resembled both relief and uncertainty. "You make it sound like I'm more than I feel," she admitted, her voice trembling just slightly. I shook my head, a small, sincere smile tugging at my lips. "You are. You've lived through more than most people, and it shows in everything you do. It doesn't make you older. It makes you remarkable." For a long moment, we walked in silence, our hands brushing occasionally, the kind of touch that lingers not for comfort alone, but for connection. I could feel the subtle rhythm of her breathing, the faint warmth radiating from her skin, and I noticed how the light caught her hair, revealing soft silver threads that only made her seem more alive, more real. She laughed quietly, almost to herself, a sound that was at once hesitant and genuine. "I don't think anyone's ever said that to me before," she murmured, and I realized then how rare these moments were, how delicate the thread between us had become. There was no rush, no expectation, just the quiet intimacy of two people slowly learning to trust, to notice, and to allow themselves to feel. Her hand lingered near mine as we continued walking, unspoken words suspended in the air, a promise of something deeper yet to come. The weeks after that evening in the park passed in a slow rhythm, each meeting lingering longer than the last. Our conversations had grown deeper, our silences more comfortable, yet an unspoken tension threaded itself between us. I noticed it in the way she occasionally hesitated before responding, in the way her gaze would drift just past me when something more personal hovered at the edges of our talk. One cool evening, she invited me to her apartment to help her organize some old books she'd rescued from her childhood home. It was casual on the surface, but the air carried a subtle electricity. The apartment was warm, softly lit by a desk lamp and the fading daylight streaming through the windows. We worked side by side, moving stacks of books, our hands brushing occasionally. Each contact, however brief, lingered in my skin long after. A sleeve would graze her arm, a finger would meet hers on a shelf, and I could feel the pulse of unspoken questions in those fleeting touches. "Do you ever think people notice the age difference?" she asked suddenly, breaking a silence that had grown heavy with anticipation. I paused, turning to meet her eyes. She looked vulnerable, uncertain, a rare glimpse of hesitation behind her usual composed demeanor. "I think it matters less than you think," I said softly. "What matters is how we feel in the moments we share." She nodded, her lips pressed into a thoughtful line. There was a quiet power in her acknowledgement, as if she was testing herself against a fear she didn't want to name aloud. Later, when the air grew colder, I draped my jacket over her shoulders without thinking. She froze for a fraction of a second, then let it happen, leaning slightly into the warmth. The fabric smelled faintly of cedar and rain, a grounding presence between us. Our fingers brushed as I adjusted the collar, a small, deliberate act, and I could sense the quickening of her heartbeat beneath her clothes. We moved to sit near the window, watching the city lights blink on one by one. She crossed her legs toward me, closer than necessary, as if testing a boundary she wasn't sure she wanted to cross. I caught her eye, and for a moment words seemed unnecessary. Her gaze held both caution and curiosity, a silent question hanging between us. I let my shoulder brush against hers lightly, careful and gentle. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let the contact linger, small but intimate, a statement in itself. In that quiet, simple closeness, I realized how fragile yet compelling this bond had become. Every gesture, every brush of skin, carried meaning beyond explanation. The hesitation wasn't rejection. It was consideration, the careful weighing of a connection neither of us fully understood yet dared to feel. And in that delicate balance, I knew something undeniable was taking root. A closeness that didn't need words, yet spoke louder than anything we could say aloud. It was one of those evenings that seemed ordinary until it wasn't. We had met for coffee again, sitting in the quiet corner of the same cafe where we'd first spoken. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows, a soft rhythm that somehow made the space feel even more intimate. The room smelled faintly of brewed espresso and paper, familiar and grounding. Yet the air between us carried a weight I couldn't ignore. She was unusually quiet, tracing the rim of her cup with her fingers, her gaze distant. I tried to follow the thread of her thoughts, but there was a hesitation in her eyes I hadn't seen before, a careful holding back. "Are you okay?" I asked softly, careful not to push. She shook her head lightly, as if shaking off a thought she didn't want to name. "It's nothing," she said, though the pause before her words betrayed her. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on the table. "It doesn't have to be nothing with me," I said. "You can tell me anything." Her hands tightened around the cup for a brief moment before she set it down, her eyes finally meeting mine. The vulnerability in her gaze made my chest tighten. This feels dangerous," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to mislead you or myself." I could feel my own pulse quicken, but I kept my voice steady. "You're not misleading me. I know what I feel when I'm with you." The words seemed to hover between us, weighty and deliberate. She blinked, and for a moment, it felt as though the rest of the cafe had vanished. The soft hum of conversation, the clinking of cups, all of it faded into a background hum. Her hand rested near mine on the table, and I felt the subtle warmth radiating from her skin. Slowly, almost instinctively, she placed her palm over mine. The contact was brief, tentative, yet it spoke volumes. Her fingers curved slightly around mine, a delicate acknowledgement of the bond we had been building. We stayed like that for a long moment, simply breathing and existing in the shared space between us. I could feel the tension of unspoken words, the silent questions hanging in the air. She didn't pull away, though her eyes flickered with a mix of fear and longing, an emotional tug-of-war that mirrored my own inner struggle. "I don't know if I'm ready," she murmured almost to herself. I smiled softly, keeping my hand still beneath hers. "Then we'll go as slowly as you need. I'm not rushing anything." Her lips curved into the faintest of smiles, the kind that is both grateful and hesitant, a quiet surrender without words. For a fleeting moment, the world outside the window didn't exist. There was only this, two people, seated close, hands touching, hearts quietly reaching across the space between them. And in that fragile, beautiful silence, I realized just how much she had come to mean to me, and how much I was willing to wait for her to feel the same. After that evening in the cafe, a subtle tension began to stretch between us, like a string pulled just tight enough to hum but not snap. She started to pull back, spending less time in the quiet corners we had claimed for ourselves. I could sense it in her texts, brief and polite, in the hesitant way she accepted invitations but didn't offer them. It was as if she was trying to protect herself, and maybe me, from something she couldn't yet name. I didn't confront her about it. Instead, I let my presence be steady, consistent without pressing. Small gestures mattered. A book left for her at the cafe, a note tucked under her coffee cup, a casual message asking how her day had gone. Nothing demanding, nothing intrusive, just reminders that I was still here. One evening, the rain came suddenly, drumming on the city streets in a relentless rhythm. I had gone out for a walk, and by chance, or maybe fate, I found her beneath the awning of a small corner shop, shielding herself from the downpour. Her hair was damp, her coat clinging slightly to her shoulders, and she looked fragile in a way that made my chest tighten. "Caught in the rain?" I asked softly, stepping beside her. She laughed quietly, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. "Seems like it." There was an edge to her smile, a mix of surprise and tension, and I could feel the weight of all the distance she had tried to put between us. I shrugged off my own coat and offered it to her, but she hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely," I said. "It's meant to keep you warm." Her fingers brushed mine as she accepted it, the contact fleeting but deliberate. I noticed the quickening of her breath, the subtle shift of her shoulders, the way her eyes softened under the dim light of the street lamp. We stood close, the rain falling around us, yet the space between us seemed charged with more than just moisture in the air. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "Why do you make it so hard to stay away?" Her words caught me off guard. The vulnerability in her voice, the quiet longing, resonated in the hollow spaces of my chest. I let my hand brush against hers again, gentle this time, resting briefly over the back of her hand. "Because I don't want you to," I replied softly, letting the words hang between us without needing explanation. For a moment she didn't speak. She let herself feel the closeness, the warmth of shared space, the quiet certainty of a bond that had grown despite hesitation, despite fear. Then, slowly, her body relaxed, leaning just slightly toward mine. Not fully, not yet, but enough that I could feel the subtle surrender, the unspoken permission to be near. In that rain-soaked street, everything else fell away. The distance, the doubts, the hesitations, they all faded. What remained was a quiet, undeniable connection, fragile yet certain, waiting for the next step, waiting for the moment when words would no longer be enough. The tension that had hovered between us for weeks finally began to ease, like the last chill of winter giving way to a slow, gentle spring. We met one late afternoon at the cafe, the same corner table that had become a silent witness to our unspoken moments. The air smelled faintly of roasted coffee and rain-soaked streets, familiar and comforting, yet it carried a sense of anticipation that neither of us could ignore. She arrived first, as always, and I noticed the way she paused at the door, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. She smiled, a real, unguarded smile, and my chest tightened. It was a smile that carried all the hesitations, all the vulnerability we had navigated together, and now it shone with something softer. Trust. "Hey," she said, her voice low, warm, almost shy. "Hey," I replied, smiling back, trying to keep my excitement in check. We sat down, and for a while we didn't speak. We didn't need to. Our hands brushed as we reached for our drinks, and the simple contact carried more meaning than any words could convey. I could feel her warmth, the subtle pulse of life beneath her skin, and I knew she felt it too. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet, careful. I've been thinking a lot," she said. "About us, about this." She gestured vaguely, but the meaning was clear. I reached across the table, letting my fingers lightly curl around hers. "And," I prompted gently, my heart hammering in my chest. Her gaze met mine, steady, and I saw in it a reflection of the same longing I had felt all along. "I don't want to hide from this anymore," she admitted. "I don't want to hold back." The words hung between us, fragile and yet impossible to ignore. I gave her hand a reassuring squeeze, letting her feel the steadiness of my own heartbeat. "You don't have to. We'll take it one moment at a time together." She let out a soft breath, leaning slightly closer, her head tilting in a way that allowed her shoulder to brush against mine. I felt the warmth of her body, subtle and grounding, and I let my shoulder meet hers fully. No rush, no grand gestures, just closeness, deliberate and gentle. She laughed quietly, a sound full of relief and contentment. "I've been waiting for this," she said. "Me too," I replied softly, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. My fingers lingered at her temple for a heartbeat longer than necessary, a silent promise of care and presence. We walked out together as the sun dipped low, the city lights beginning to flicker on. She leaned her head lightly against my shoulder, and I rested my hand over hers, our fingers interlacing naturally. There were no grand proclamations, no dramatic confessions. Just the quiet, undeniable truth of two people who had chosen to be near each other despite hesitation, despite fear. And in that moment, walking side by side with her warmth against me, I realized that sometimes the most powerful love is not shouted. It is quietly, patiently, and unwaveringly shared.